Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the State of Flow podcast with me, Lena Kaliyah. Thank you so much for having me in your ears once again. And this episode is episode 29. Time is flying, and it's going to be all about why your childhood determines who you are now. Honestly, this is such an important topic, and also, to be honest, no matter who I work with and no matter what we're working on, as well as in my own life, everything, even though you might think it's a gut health issue or you're attracting the wrong relationships or you spin the same circles and find yourself on a plateau in your business or in certain habits that you keep and patterns that you keep repeating in your life, or you think it might be diet issue or whatever it is, so often, like 99% of the time, it has to do with our childhood and some conditioning that's coming from those early days of ours. And so this episode is just a little bit of free flow around this conversation of childhood trauma and childhood conditioning and experiences. And when I say trauma, I always acknowledge that some things are fundamentally worse than others, yet the same as when I'm talking about stress. I really do emphasize that stress, no matter what direction it's coming from, it's all triggering the same biological and neuromuscular responses in our body. And it's the same with trauma. No matter how severe or mild it was, it does create the same patterns in our brain pathways and therefore in our behaviors. Also, as a side note, as I'm recording this, I got no idea how the audio quality is panning out. Today is one of those days where technology is just not working for me, and instead of getting worked up about it and trying for 2 hours, I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna record anyways. But I feel like my S's are hissing a lot, at least through the mic. I'm hearing it right now. Anyways, apologies if it's not up to scratch this time. But let's come back to this conversation. Essentially it's all the same. I have so many clients or people in my life or things I went through myself where we think like, oh, I'm struggling to keep off this weight, or I keep falling back into those same eating habits or into the same relationship cycles, be that romantic or with our friends, or the same work environment, or I can't push past my income limit, or I can't seem to break through this upper limit, I call it, that we can only be so happy, so successful, so much, so this, so that, until we hit our own glass ceiling. That really very much does not relate to what we are doing wrong right now. It's not about something we are practically doing wrong or not doing in a way it needs to be done to be thinner, to be more successful, to be happier. But it has to do with not yet having done or broken through entirely this internal work of working on our mindset. And mindset and positive thinking and affirmations and being in the now and all this stuff is all well and good, but we really got to work on the root cause of things. You can't just realize that you have a money blockage or that you have a blockage when it comes to upkeeping a healthy lifestyle and nutrition, and then just keep saying affirmations and everything will be good and changing, because it won't. You need to actually dig deeper into the root causes and ask yourself, where is it coming from? And quite often we do find, and that has nothing to do whether you had a beautiful childhood and your parents loved you and cared for you wholeheartedly with every cell of their being, or whether you had a bit of a broken home or childhood or anything like that, because conditioning happens no matter what. And then it's just the question of discerning for the worse or for the better, And you find that most of the issues you're running in right now does have to do with this conditioning. And so it's not just kind of, do you hear the birds, by the way? So nice in the background. I hope it records this. But when it comes to our mindset and what's holding us back right now, it's not just some shallow blockage in, those outskirts of our mind that we quickly overcome with an affirmation, or we'll be good and we keep moving. But very often, most of the time, is something very foundational that might not be super obvious to us yet. And when I say that it has nothing to do with whether we had a beautiful childhood or not, conditioning happens anyways. And that's just the nature of life, that whether we're born as a human or anything else, but when our souls choose to come down here and we come out as this little, we're conceived and then we come out as this little baby, we are crystal, we are pure, we are just pure consciousness that's yet so unconditioned when we're freshly coming out into this world. And then literally from the moment we are conceived into this physical world, into the body we're being put in, till we die, we're going to be conditioned and shaped by our outside world, by all those external influences that, especially in the first 7 years of child development, or anything for that matter, think of your puppy. Those first few years are really, really fundamental years of personality development, and where we have all those first times, all those virgin experiences where we develop this sense of discernment for what is good, what is bad, what is success, what is good girl, good boy, bad girl, bad boy, what, how to speak, how to behave, how to interact with different people, with loved ones, with strangers, how to hold a knife and fork, don't touch the stove when it's hot, all those what we think fundamental things, but we get conditioned and learn those in those first few years. And that's not only those physical things of learning to walk and off you go, but it is character shaping is what's happening during that time as well. And that's why, and also our parents, or our guardians, are the people we spend the most time with in those very early days of our life, or early years really. They have a massive unconscious influence on us, and we actually unconsciously start to mirror a lot of their behaviors, because if we think of truth, right, there is no one truth. Truth is really subjective when it comes to interaction within this physical world. My truth of this situation right now, of me sitting here talking to you guys through my podcast, my perception of this reality can be completely different to how you guys are receiving, listening to me, having me in your ears, and from your point of view, from your end of the reality, right? And they are both truthful because they are both authentic experiences, yet they might really vary. Or think of having, an argument, and whether or not you're right or wrong with a loved one doesn't matter, but the truth is that you are feeling a certain way about something right now. You can feel it, right? And that's why it's truthful to you. It's your truth. While your significant other you're arguing with, they are triggered by something they are feeling, and that is truthful to them right now. So we see how, truth is just so subjective. And therefore, when we are little and we are only exposed to our parents and guardians and so forth, we are experiencing the world guided by their truth and what they know, and how they perceive the world and others, and what their values and their morals and their ethics are, which are obviously all shaped by their own struggles and experiences that go all the way back into their childhood, and which then tie in with their ancestors have raised them, that tie in with their struggles and the time they lived in, and their goals and their priorities and so forth. So you see how we are just really conditioned by our ancestral lineage and their experiences in the time you're born in and what's going on and so forth. So even though you haven't had a traumatic childhood as such, there's still conditioning going on. And there can be things like having a money block, for example, and then when you really trace it back and down, what's your money story? Well, actually it is that we grew up in a poor household where we never had enough, and where mom and dad will constantly talk about money, where the only fights and arguments would be about money, and where we just never had enough money and only ever just seemed to be able to put food on the table for all of the kids. And that was it. Money was always a struggle. So that ends up becoming your perspective of money, and you are being conditioned that way about that particular theme, money. And if you're not aware of it and you consciously tweak it and turn it around, that's the energy you're sending off towards money. So money's not going to come your way. You're just going to keep spinning that same tail and carry on with that same story and make it yours, right? But it started in your childhood, and it's never actually been yours back then. It's been put onto you, not willingly and not consciously, but by your parents. That's one example. Or another example from my own childhood is that I was about probably 12 or something. I was very premature and very early in my puberty, and always had better older friends and things. Anyways, I was 12 or 11 or 13, something rather. I was just this age where I started to care about, wearing makeup and shaving my legs, and where girls, especially these days where everything is getting earlier and earlier, where girls and boys are just start to become very self-conscious, and in those early puberty years. And I remember I used to look into mirrors and windows a lot and look at myself. Far out. And I remember coming down into the living room, and we had this massive, like full-size, massive mirror against the wall, and you could kind of walk in and would walk towards the mirror before you get to the couches. So that was a great opportunity for me to just look at myself and check myself out all the time. But anyways, it was one of those days where I came walking down. I never wore shoes or long clothes, and I still don't really do the same, and just looked at myself in the mirror. I was super happy, and I never had weight problems or anything. And then my dad just looks at me and he's like, "Gosh, your legs are super stumpy, aren't they?" I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, you don't even have ankles. Like, your legs are toned or shaped or anything at all. They're just stumps. Look, you don't actually have the Achilles, when your Achilles muscles on the back are really defined. And mine are actually really average, but they're not really defined." He's like, "Yeah, you had such stumpy legs. You don't even have your Achilles toned, and you don't actually have proper ankles." I'm like, wow, okay. So that fully stunned me and put me in shock. But, I actually, not just from this statement, okay, that's an example, but that totally tied into me being so self-conscious for the next few years about my fingers. I got my dad's hands, like pretty fat little sausage fingers. Then my legs, I always had actually pretty awesome legs. Like, I go for a run once and all my muscles come back. I'm blessed with my mom's legs that are very muscular and very defined. So I never had stumpy legs at all. But that was this comment I got from my dad, from a person you wouldn't have expected something like that at an age where you're very vulnerable and susceptible to this self-critical, self-conscious thinking. And I actually ended up being bulimic for 6 years. Again, I'm not saying that was just because of this statement, but it definitely tied into a lot of self-conscious behavior that no one needs to show, no one should show. We should all raise beautiful little self-confident, empowered children that know their worth, that know their own beauty and their own strengths, and stand in that and take up space, and we all should have grown up the same. And we would have, in a perfect world, and perfect world would be probably a fairyland where all souls just connect without conditioning each other, without seeking to have power over each other, where we could just come here as pure consciousness, as a little baby, and then just grow into this full, beautiful, blossoming, flowering tree, instead of trying to, in super hard conditions, trying to grow our root system over years and years and grow this thin little stump trunk and then a few branches, and then realize our childhood trauma at 20 or 40 or 50 or 70 or never, and we just make it into a micro little crown. We should be thriving from the start with our conditioning. Anyways, these are just little examples. Another one was a client of mine who always had this weight problem and always deprived herself and tried all those different diets, and none of them actually ever really worked for her, and she wouldn't keep up this weight and always yo-yo back. And also, she wasn't overweight. She had a pretty distorted self-image. She was a beautiful woman, and it turned out that when she was about 12, 14 or something, one of her parents, or some sort of family member, actually took the bowl of fried chips away from her while they were all eating. She said, you don't need to eat any more of those. You're good as you are. You're fat enough, or something like that. And, that stuck with her into adult years. And she remained being so self-conscious of herself. So, whether it comes to health issues and physical things and self-esteem about how you look and so forth, or just self-confidence and how you show up in the world and who and what you attract in, it all does have to do with our childhood experiences. And so this episode is really just to, inspire you to look a little deeper, to not content yourself with being average and running into glass ceiling after glass ceiling after glass ceiling and wondering, like, why can't I push through that? I've been trying this for freaking 20 years, and you don't get any further and just give up. Don't, because you can push through anything. Maybe it's just that you haven't looked deep enough, and that's why I think childhood and psychology in that sense is so incredibly interesting. And the trauma we actually carry that's passed down from our ancestral lineage, for one. So our genetic makeup, remember that we are made out of billions, if not more, of cells, and each of these cells has their own nucleus, their own brain, their own information and storage center. So everything we experience that impacts us is stored on a cellular level in our DNA. And when a male and a female come together and they have a baby, and then their DNAs combine and create a daughter cell, or son cell, which becomes us and a new human being. And so we got their genetic material, we got parts of their DNA, which means we also get passed down parts of their trauma. And they got parts from their parents' trauma, and their parents, and their parents, and their parents, and their parents. And let's be honest, the world we're living in, like the human civilization world, is not the prettiest. It's not just fairy tales. To be honest, there's way more nightmares going on than anything. And human history has been a history of madness that keeps repeating itself over and over. And I'm just saying that to keep in mind that we're not down here to have an easy, fun ride. It's all, Earth is a masterclass. It's a training ground, right? And that's why we have to keep pushing through those blockages. And that's why you have to look deeper and be like, oh, interesting. I wonder why I can't achieve this goal. I wonder what's holding me back. Actually, remember this instance in childhood. And then you ask yourself, okay, why did I get treated that way? Or why did that person react to me that way? Or why did that person do this to me, or whatever it is? And how does it play into their ancestral trauma? Why do they think this is how you show love? Because that's the only way in which they know love, things like that. And it's so interesting when you go deeper into, okay, what's being passed down through your lineage? And that's where you can start to break the cycle. And so, because nothing about being down here should be easy, right? It's all for growth. So that's one aspect. The ancestral trauma that we can hold and carry, and the limited beliefs and stories. Another aspect is our soul trauma. Now, that really has to do with what your beliefs are. I guess if we are in episode 29 and you're still listening to me, you are probably resonating somewhat with my beliefs and what I'm putting out there. And I very much believe in reincarnation. I very much believe in that this lifetime is only a tiny, tiny little section of our entire soul journey. And think about it, our soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, is eternal, right? So we come down here into this body, and we've been on this earth maybe hundreds, if not thousands of times. And that's where this whole term of old soul and new soul comes from. It's a thing. If you're into this, a book that I would really recommend is The Journey of Souls which is about a soul's life in between lives. It's written by a accredited hypnotherapist and something else medical. I think he is an American or Canadian. Anyways, he's done case studies with people over 2 or 3 decades, and has, out of hundreds of case studies, he has condensed the patterns that he sees reoccurring into 30 case studies in this book that tell you about where our souls go after death, how we choose new lives, new bodies, new locations, new lessons, and so forth. It's incredible. And so he retrieved this information in hypnosis through their clients when he was working on past life traumas, and realized that what's actually more relevant to people, to all those individuals he worked with, than their past life is what happened after, what happened in between those lives. Where do they go? It's so incredible, and it's science-backed. It's written by a Western person through a clinical hypnotherapy practice. I think he might be a psychologist, but don't quote me on that. The journey on souls, incredible. So, if that's what you believe, it certainly is what I do, then we know that this lifetime is only a little part of our whole soul journey, which is eternal. And the whole point of coming down here over and over again into different lifetimes is to grow. And so that means that we're not only impacted by our ancestral trauma, by those physical genetic ancestors that of this lifetime that we have while we're down here, that I have as Lena Kermode with my family lineage in Germany, that were half Jew and half, I think, Eastern European and Scandinavian and so forth. But also you're carrying your own soul conditioning from previous lives, which has nothing to do with this current ancestry of your genetic family, your blood family, but of where you've been and what you've experienced as a soul. Like, I personally know I've had some powerful female lives in past lives in Scandinavia, in the Viking days, in Rome, in the, what's the word, when the church started going around and burning witches days. And I had some pretty traumatic recent past lives as a male in Germany and Russia around war times. And, so they are all things that are in your being. I've had physical pains removed from my body through years of therapy and doing work on it with people and so forth, that have related to past lives. And I know that because I can feel it, I could see it, and the pains have gone, the issues have gone after I resolved it. Anyways, that's something I could talk on for hours, but you see how, we just carry stuff around with us if we're not careful. So it's really worth, whenever you hit another upper limit of yours, to check in and see, like, okay, I wonder what's behind that, and do that work and dig deeper and retrieve where those limiting beliefs and limiting mindsets and self-conscious behavior is coming from, and then rewrite that story by, then you can create a mantra that's actually proving the opposite, the positive, and then you start taking action on that and really put the intention to it, and from this intention action grows, and from the action change grows, and there won't be upper limits anymore. Everything you can overcome. All right, beautiful light beam, thank you so much for joining me once again for this episode number 29. And I hope you're digging a little bit deeper into how your own childhood has impacted who you are right now, and what you're dealing with, what's important to you right now. I would love you to post some inspo, anything you got out of this episode, any questions, anything else that came up, into our Facebook group, the State of Flow community group, or tag me in social media, Lena Kermode Ayurveda on Instagram, or tag the State of Flow podcast. Beautiful. I see you guys in the next episode.